ever played a game and found yourself thinking, well, this is fun and all, but wouldn't this experience be so much better if I could instead control a massive anthropomorphized boulder rolling down a hill littered with sticky cows and tactical blimps on a collision course to fatally mangle famous historical and mythical figures, all to the tune of classical music composed by several hundred-year-old dead guys whose names I can't pronounce? Come on, it's okay to say yes. So way back in 2011, when I was just a 12-year-old little mud-eating, pants-soiling ankle-biter, my friends introduced me to a recently released title by the name of Rock of Ages, a game which combined the strategically challenging intrigue of the tower defense genre with the mechanically challenging gameplay of a racing platformer that essentially took that framework, pushed it up the court, and self-oop slam-dunked that shit straight into the heart of the Louvre Museum, using a myriad of historical and mythological features and events, as well as an abundance of classical music and artwork to create a game that was both a tactically and tactily satisfying experience, and also perhaps one of the most insanely unhinged, unapologetically ridiculous, and relentlessly goofy pieces of media I have ever consumed. And while a lot has changed since my golden days as a gangly-limbed, sickly, pale, pubescent Liberace, two things that have remained over the years are my unfaltering love for this game and my utter astonishment that even now, after 3 back-to-back bangers of installments from this series, I've seen like one batch of Jacksepticeye Let's Plays and otherwise have heard very little buzz about just how great these games are. And so anyway, with that in mind, I think you get the gist. I'm just here to sell you on these criminally underrated, irrefutably iconic classics. So sit back and get ready to rock. And if you thought that joke was bad, welcome to the channel. So for those of you who have never heard of this game before, let me briefly explain the premise. Basically, in Rock of Ages, you play as a massive rock or some other massive rock-adjacent object, and your goal is to roll down a long, winding, obstacle-heavy hill, gaining enough momentum to smash through the gate of your opponent's castle at the bottom. Meanwhile, your opponent is racing to break your castle down first with the terrifying might of their greatest military weapon, also just a big rock. You're just racing rocks down a hill. Look, both sides have castles on terrible real estate and are banking the fate of their entire kingdoms on literal hunks of bedrock. Clearly, this is the best they can afford. Anyway, this is of course only half of the equation, as the other half of this game is about constructing defenses to thwart your opponent's charge. So how does each player defend their hill from the opposing boulder? Great question. So at the start of a match, each side draws from the less than impressive remaining funds of the Royal Piggy Bank to purchase units to defend their hill. What kind of units, you ask? Yet another A1 question, unspecified inquirer. So with each installment in the series, more units are added to what was offered in the last game, but generally speaking, what every game offers is a range of units from long-distance weapons like ballistas and trebuchets to close-range hazards that smash or toss your boulder all around, to actual militarized animals that will actively pursue and attack your boulder on sight. And so, for example, just to give you a little taste of what you can expect, here are some of my personal favorite units that you can use in these games.
War Elephant, Wheel of Hay, Sticky Cow, Windmill Fan, Whale, Bumper Frog, The Fool, Da Vinci Tank, Guillotine.
And then there are other important ones like towers that block the boulders and gold mines that generate money, but whatever, who cares about those? Anyway, from that brief display, you probably get the vibe. These defense units exemplify the 3 big S's of making good tower defense units. They're silly, they're stupid, and they're somewhat practical. If you squint really hard and ignore most known fundamental truths of modern science. But if you think that's where the fun ends, then hold your horses, or if they're Trojan, then I guess leave them on the battlefield, because after around a minute or so of amassing your reject Suicide Squad defense team, players will be able to start rolling their boulder down the hill. And with that, it's time to crank those Renaissance remixes and head off to the races. Which, side note, touching on that point before we move on, in all seriousness, this game's soundtrack is just loaded with incredible modern spins on historical classics, so you don't want to prepare a rag, because you're gonna cream your friggin' codpiece upon hearing this shit. Anyway, from this point on, players compete to be the first to reach the enemy castle at the bottom of the hill. And since it usually takes a good 3 or so rounds with the boulder to break that castle gate, there's clear incentive to get your little pebbly cheeks moving at top speed, because the faster you get your boulder to the bottom, the faster you can start rolling the next one down. And in terms of actually controlling the boulder, this game actually offers you ample options for different boulders you can use, with some even giving you bonus abilities like the Angel Boulder, which gives you 1 extra jump per round, the Armor Boulder, which is just a regular boulder, but even stronger and markedly less naked, or the Balloon, which makes you slower and weaker, but way lighter, ergo more capable of clearing large larger gaps that heavier boulders couldn't manage. But even setting aside that fun little customization aspect, just the controls for and handling on the boulder as you guide it down the hill, although a bit difficult to learn at first, has such a unique and satisfying feeling to it. And once you get the hang of it, you can even start to learn some really crazy and impressive jumps and skips. Like, true story, I am by no means what one would call a high-caliber gamer, but when the second Rock of Ages game came out, I had recently started at a college where I didn't know anybody, and so naturally, as the 18-year-old misanthropic sad sack shut-in I was, instead of making friends, I decided to grind Rock of Ages 2 time trials until I was able to discover a map skip so insane that I immediately jumped up to 6th in the global leaderboards for that map in under an hour. And then within the week, they patched out that skip, so then I lost my sick jump, and I had no friends, but that's fine. Yeah, I mean, that's neither here nor there. It's kind of... Anyway, so speaking of time trials, did you know that these games have a bunch of other game modes too? Let's talk about those, or like literally anything but what we were just talking about. And what even was it? I can't even remember. Hey, did I mention this soundtrack is also available on YouTube? Anyway, let's go! So if the standard game mode isn't your bread and boulder, then worry not, because you've got ample options on your plate. For example, there's obstacle course mode, where instead of trying to break down the opposing castle, you and your opponent book it down the same obstacle-littered hill in a race to be the first to the bottom. Then next up, you've got every quarter-huckin' arcade junkie's national pastime, skee ball, or ski boulder in this case, wherein you make your way down to the bottom of the hill only to find a massive skee ball chute, which just kinda naturally begs the question of why. But since we'll likely never know the answer to that mystery, you can just hurl yourself into it, no questions asked, rack up some points, and pray to God that you can sleep at night knowing that a looming mystery such as that truly exists in this twisted world. And then, of course, rounding out the extra game modes for the first Rock of Ages, you've got time trials, which I already mentioned for some reason that probably had to do with how cool and sociable I am. But anyway, the time trials are simply a race against your own best times or against the world leaderboards. And this game mode is one of my particular favorites because not only is it a great way to practice controlling the boulder, but it's also a great way to discover shortcuts in the maps, which, when pulled off, are some of the most satisfying feelings your little gamer heart can ever experience. And oh boy, let me tell you, if you ever need a good reminder that A, some people are insanely good at video games, and 2, you are not one of those people, you can find a lot of the Rock of Ages time trial world record runs on YouTube, and your jaw will drop harder than an actual boulder when you see some of the crazy things that people can do in this game. Anyway, after the first game, Rock of Ages 2 mostly provided quality of life improvements to the series, adding more involved physics mechanics, 4-player multiplayer, and online compatibility. However, I definitely question whether or not those servers are in fact still active. But then come Rock of Ages 3, we saw a whole slew of new mini-games that keep casuals like me satisfied for hours, with the new staple game mode being the level creator, which I admittedly had not tried, nor had I played on any custom maps before this. But anyway, like I said, this game absolutely came to bat when it comes to minigames, and so outside of the level creator, you also have Unit Challenge, where players can only use a single unit to defend their hill, Boulder Avalanche, where the player has to build up enough units to defend against an onslaught of dozens of boulders, and my personal problematic favorite game mode, perhaps in this entire series, the Humpty Dumpty levels, wherein you must maneuver a conveniently double jumping but less than easy to control, very quickly broken, and very officially unique Humpty Dumpty through a map absolutely loaded with dangerous egg-despising obstacles and graced by the heavenly melody of a song that is... Look, I know that I've already gushed about the soundtrack, but this one just has a special place in my heart. I mean, tell me this isn't the most delightfully absurd, yodely little morsel your ears have ever chewed on. And so, with all of this Rock of Ages 3 hype, you might be led to believe that with all the features the newer games offer, there's no real need to check out the former games. And while one can certainly argue for the fact that each game is worth its own playthrough thanks to the characters, music, and levels that are all unique to every game, I would say that by far the strongest, most compelling reason for giving each installment a shot is none other than the eternally entertaining, undeniably unique Rock of Ages stories. So this is, in my opinion, the crowning jewel of these games. Now, of course, the story mode is great because it does a fantastic job of showcasing the game, its mechanics, all the maps, units, and boulders, blah, blah, blah. But what really makes the story mode shine is the absolutely bizarre nonsense that's sprinkled all throughout this experience that genuinely makes you wonder if, for a creative director, this company hired that one weird kid in school that always sat in the back of the class drawing stuff like aliens smoking crack with the president or Squidward tentacles with a fat set of jugs. In other words, when I was talking earlier about how how unhinged, ridiculous, and goofy this game is, the majority stakeholder in that claim to fame is most certainly the story mode. I mean, from the offset, things seem normal. The story mode just starts in every game with a different piece of actual, real-life Boulder-related mythology, which, side note, feels weird that there's enough specifically Boulder-related folklore that you can make like 3 games worth of content out of that. But anyway, it's nice. It's worth a couple hearty chuckles for sure, but then the historical accuracy very quickly flies out the window, and the game pretty immediately becomes an unpredictably ridiculous, fully off-the-walls journey through ancient times, across historical sites, and against infamous figures or creatures to achieve your ultimate goal of, well, I guess just generally rolling a bunch of stuff over with a big rock. But that's really all the explanation that a game like this needs, and as the story heats up, so too does the environment. Not literally, though. Pretty sure in the first game you escape from Hades in, like, level 1, so actually the levels after that were all probably comparatively quick. Not the point. As the levels continue on, the stakes begin to build as you watch as the stages become absurd places like a fairy tale wonderland or an actively erupting Pompeii, and your enemies go from things like prolific artists and philosophers, or legendary generals and warriors, to things like the Great He-Goat, Baba Yaga, or the Flying Spaghetti Monster. And this is made even better by the fact that every character you defeat, you then unlock, which, despite doing a net total of absolutely nothing to improve stats or gameplay, does make collecting all these strange creatures you've just pummeled feel like a weird historically themed game of Pokemon. And that's great! Every level also has a short cutscene to set the scene on the person, place, and time period you'll be rolling all over, and I don't think going into detail over these will really convey any new ideas that I haven't already conveyed on the out-of-pocket nature of this series, but I still wanted to bring it up, because how can I not talk about things like getting the full-on Matrix 2 living in a simulation speech from Da Vinci, a straight-up Poke battle between Adam and Eve and the Devil Snake, or Santa dispatching a heavy metal headbanging Krampus to abduct a small boy and destroy his house. Like, do you get what I'm saying now about the whole creative director thing? And to top things off, as if this game needed another notch up the insanity meter, every few levels or so you get to face off against one of these game's absolutely legendary bosses. And once again, if you can believe it, these things are absolutely bonkers, ranging anything from loading your boulder into a mortar to cannonball into a giant statue of David's cannon and balls, to literally 1v1ing God in foosball, to chasing down Moby Dick on an ocean full of collapsing glaciers. And if you're thinking, okay, well, that's cool and all, but with all these examples you're giving away, you've probably already spoiled like every interesting and fun part of this game, then I strongly encourage that you check these games out, because I guarantee that what I've discussed here is very much the tip of a much bigger, much more interesting, and much more absurd iceberg. So in closing, I think it's safe to say that in its 12 or so years since release, this game has made a massive boulder-sized impression on myself and many others. The game is exceptionally original, the gameplay is smooth and engaging, there are plenty of game modes to try out, the story mode is hilariously ridiculous, and the maps, art style, and boulder and unit designs are all super charming. Not to mention, I didn't even get to this part because I'm just a little pea-brain that doesn't know dink about old history, but if you're a history or philosophy buff, this game is filled to the brim with historical or mythological Easter eggs that are gonna scratch all your little history nerd itches. It's just an incredible game, nothing more to be said. In other words, this game genuinely has a little something for everybody. I think it's an underrated behemoth of the gaming industry, and if you watch this video and decide to go back and give it another playthrough or pick one of the games up and try it out for the first time, let me know in the comments what you think, and happy trails. With that said, thank you all for watching, do yourself a favor and play this game, and I'll catch you on the flip side, gamers. Until next time, rock on. I am so sorry.